Even with all the chaos around us, of course, the 2020 election moves forward, and the latest head-to-head matchup is looking pretty good for former Vice President Joe Biden.
Currently leads over the President Trump by 6 percentage points in the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, 5-point gain since the last time a similar poll was conducted. But it's a very, very long march to November. And joining us for more on this race is now the Director of Strategic Communications for the Trump campaign, Marc Lotter. Marc, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
Absolutely. Marc, one of the interesting things that we've seen is that currently the poll margin over President Biden and Trump and some of these head-to-heads is lower than what Hillary Clinton's was at the similar point in 2016. How is the campaign feeling about the state of the race right now, despite all of the pandemic craziness that's going on around us?
Well, we feel very strongly going into it because we think the American people are seeing the president's leadership. His Real Clear Politics average is at the highest level of his presidency. Our internal polling that we put out yesterday shows an overwhelming majority of the American people, about 90%, support the president's decision to expand the coronavirus stay in place guidelines. But also, when you look at that poll, about 50% of the American people approve of the president's leadership during this crisis.
Wow.
And Marc, obviously this crisis has upended our country and upended the entire world, and has certainly changed the sort of strategy and timeline for how the campaign unfolds. How are you thinking about things and approaching things differently?
Well, I think one of the things that we have a tremendous advantage when it comes to our data and digital operations. It's something that the Democrats have known that we have had for a long time. So that puts us in a very strong position. I mean, you can just look the other night. We had an event online with Kayleigh McEnany and with Laura Trump that drew nearly 1 million people watching it. You compare that to the new podcast that the former vice president has done. He had something in the thousands. So our digital advantage is something that we are ready to take advantage of as we move into this new era of campaigning. But we're also confident that once we start to move into summer, we get into fall, we'll get back into that traditional campaign model. And right now, we're just continuing to build the juggernaut.
Mm-hmm. And so, Marc, with all of that, that's something Crystal and I have focused on, is that we covered a poll yesterday, or a couple days ago, which showed that the amount of very enthusiastic support in the Trump's numbers is literally double what that was with Joe Biden and the former vice president. What is the effort going to look like in order, I guess, to define Joe Biden throughout this campaign? What are some of the issues that you think you're most going to be talking about in the campaign?
Well, I think clearly, Joe Biden has a record and something that it's not that he does not like to run on, whether it is dealing with the health crisis that happened while he was vice president of the United States, or the fact that he has had to go so far to the radical left to try to attract Bernie supporters, keep Bernie supporters. Make no mistake, Joe Biden is no moderate. He is running on a very liberal platform, trillions of dollars of new tax increases, and even as we see the rest of this Democrat primary unfold, you see him going further and further to Bernie Sanders on the policy ideas, which is really going to alienate him from mainstream America as this general election unfolds.
I haven't seen any evidence of that as someone who's supportive of the Bernie Sanders agenda, but you may have a different perspective on that. But honestly, does that message still sell when we just pass through a multi-trillion-dollar effort through Washington? The how will you pay for it thing doesn't seem like a particularly salient argument in this moment.
Well, I think there's a difference between long-term policies and dealing with the crisis at hand. What you saw was Democrats and Republicans coming together to get money into the hands of Americans and to small businesses who are affected because of the coronavirus through no fault of their own. But going now and talking about raising trillions of dollars in new taxes and doing the things that really caused our economy to have such a slow and stagnant recovery under the Obama-Biden years, rather than on the rocket that we had of economic growth during President Trump's first 3 years, and I'm confident we'll be back once we get through this crisis. I think it's a very stark reality and a very stark choice for the American voters. It's one that we will be making going through November.
Let me ask you also, Marc, about voting, which is the campaign concern? There's been some speculation on this that widespread crowding won't really be allowed in the United States until a vaccine comes. We don't know when that's coming. How is the campaign thinking specifically about voting, about voters going to the polls and all that? Are there discussions being made, maybe vote by mail? What are some of the things that we're looking at?
Well, I think what you're seeing right now is the administration leading in this effort in terms of social distancing and encouraging people to stay home to stop the spread. But as you have seen, even from Dr. Fauci saying yesterday at the White House, is that if we see a seasonal return of the coronavirus, it will be in a much different form. We will be better prepared through therapeutics, but also hopefully having a vaccine further enough along and testing that we'll be able to handle it in a much different way. We're also seeing some reports and hopeful that folks who have been exposed to it here during this first wave will have a certain amount of immunity during the second wave. So if this comes back next winter, it will be in a much different form. We will be in a position to deal with it in a much different fashion. And we're hopeful that it's not going to necessarily affect the elections. We have to make sure that we are able to hold elections, but also hold safe and secured elections and not test new unproven things that are going to be open to fraud.
Yeah.
Sure. But lots of states have mail-in balloting, and it works pretty well for them and increases turnout. I think we got to be looking at some of those things because while we all hope for the best, we just got to be prepared.
Certainly.
Marc, it's always great to have you. Thanks for your perspective today.
Thank you, Marc. Appreciate you joining us.
Good to see you guys. Stay safe.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.